I never grasped how vain, fantastical, and egocentric my wife was until she somehow rationalized her infidelity as a kind of moral act. These notions echoed in my mind as I confronted the astounding reality of her infidelity. The moment was charged. She took deep, passionate breaths, her face and chest flushed with arousal. Her eyes burned with a fiery intensity, a stare that defied me, prompting me to back down. This story reveals the odyssey of love, deceit, and the quest for truth amid the ruins of what I once deemed ideal. Behold the shattering of fantasies. Does the wife believe it's okay to love more than one person simultaneously? Today's article delves into a comparable tale. Discover it in a deserted part of Chicago on a chilly, bleak November day. My gaze swept the landscape, uncovering remains of trees, walls blackened by soot, and bits of shattered glass and rubbish strewn about by the persistent wind. This scene seemed like an allegory for my existence, a desolate, scorched husk overwhelmed by loneliness and resentment. As I stood there contemplating my future actions, my focus shifted to Jessica, whom I had met at a charity event some weeks earlier. My cousin Seth had invited me to this event and suggested I network there to enhance my business prospects. The evening was unremarkable, yet Jessica captured my attention with her poise and confidence. We spent the night engaged in delightful discourse, and I decided to invite her to dinner. Our date was enriched by mutual interests, and I quickly became attracted to her. We dated for a few months before our relationship faded. Despite my reservations and uncertainties, Jessica made a move one evening, demonstrating that passion is not a male prerogative. She whisked me away on an adventure that made us feel like a team on mechanical bulls, leaving me completely exhilarated. It was the most amusing experience I had had in ages. From then, intimacy in our relationship grew more frequent and natural. We began cohabitating a few months after our initial meeting and tied the knot just over a year later. We settled into a large 4-bedroom house in a lush, tree-lined neighborhood, landscaped the garden, adopted a dog, and life was blissful. Nearly every aspect of married life appealed to me. I hesitated to acknowledge the end of my solitude, the unconditional emotional support, the satisfaction derived from meaningful physical intimacy. Having someone to love and cherish, it was everything I had hoped for and more. Of course, there were minor issues. I was often too preoccupied with work, which irritated Jessica, and she probably had grievances about other habits of mine. Naturally, certain things annoyed me as well. Perhaps the most significant problem was that we had to spend more time with her family than I would have liked. Do not misunderstand, I did not loathe her family. They were amiable, respectable individuals with good manners and no particularly offensive qualities. Although I did not relish spending abundant time with them, her parents were affable and cheerful people who seemed to value me, yet they often offered advice on how we should live our lives and urged us to start a family. But our interactions were infrequent enough that it was not a major issue. It wasn't a significant problem. Her younger sister Mindy and her husband were a bit more of a challenge for me. Mindy was a shorter, slightly heavier version of Jessica. She dressed and spoke in a manner akin to Jessica, and when Jessica was around, she rarely left her side for long. They were almost like conjoined twins, engaging in private talks, chuckling at inside jokes, and openly gossiping about acquaintances and relatives. Since she and her husband lived just 15 minutes away, we spent a fair amount of time together, which was tolerable, I guess. Yet it was perhaps envy, but when she was with Mindy, she wasn't really with me, and it was quite unsettling. Mindy's husband did not help matters either. He was a tall, blonde, handsome man named Bruce, easygoing, relaxed, and in my view, somewhat dim-witted. He had taken over his family's furniture business in Joliet, which he described as if it were a major enterprise, and he a prominent CEO, boasting about its superb management and how no one else in the furniture industry had a clue what they were doing. The difficulty with this viewpoint was that the shop was struggling, and I was sure that anyone knowledgeable about commerce would recognize Bruce as a harmful presence. Nevertheless, I sought peace and happiness for Jessica, which involved steering clear of familial conflicts. Hence, I spent many evenings simply agreeing by nodding my head, while usually I would endure Bruce's prolonged discussions. We had been wed nearly 2 years when Jessica initially asked for my assistance with Mindy and Bruce. She had set up an inviting dinner with candles and music to foster a soothing ambience, and her attire indicated a relaxed evening was planned. Acting like any conventional newlywed, I assumed her main goal was to enjoy a special evening just with me, but as the evening progressed, it was apparent she had other intentions. She continually pointed out our fortunate financial situation and our capability to aid others. Then, with an expression of genuine worry, she voiced her concerns about Mindy and Bruce's capacity to cope. I discovered Bruce had incurred a specific debt and was having difficulty with his repayments. Without intervention, he wouldn't be able to manage his stock. I quickly grasped her hint and took immediate action. "How much do they require?" I inquired. She hesitated, her eyebrows raised, indicating that I had misinterpreted her suggestion. She chewed her lip, reflected for a moment, and then looked shyly at me. "He needs either 50 or 60,000. This will provide them some breathing room and security." I nearly choked. Indeed, we were well off financially, but a large portion of my wealth was locked in a family trust, and such an amount would noticeably affect our liquid assets. I could access the trust funds if absolutely essential, but I was reluctant to discuss this with Bernie Blackman, our chief corporate attorney and trust manager. He would agree, but I anticipated a long debate about replenishing the funds afterwards. He wasn't unkind, he just took his responsibilities to protect the trust assets and our business very seriously. As I pondered, it became the sole time in our marriage when I considered declining Jessica's heartfelt plea. "I'm not sure, Liv. That's a significant sum," I commented. She frowned. "Mimi is confident he has some creative ideas and that they would repay the amount quickly if finances are your concern. They make a reasonable income, I'm sure." However, I remained skeptical about their financial steadiness. In fact, I was convinced that sending the money to Bruce would result in a considerable financial loss. Nevertheless, I wanted Jessica to be content, so I issued a check for $60,000 and informed her this would necessitate tightening our budget until the money was returned. I once heard that when you lend money to a relative, assume it's lost forever. This approach prepares you emotionally, preserving the relationship should they fail to repay. Therefore, in my eyes, it was a $60,000 donation to Jessica's sister and her somewhat inept brother-in-law. I doubted it would rectify the issue because I didn't believe he was capable enough to operate his store independently, even with fiscal support. I was unhappy, but I resolved to be a decent man for her and her family, willing to part with $60,000 to achieve that. 3 to 4 months after lending Bruce the money, I was at home looking for a flash drive containing critical data. I frequently misplace essential items, so I almost turned the entire house upside down. After examining all the usual places, I went into the guest room and looked over the table and under the bed. When I stood up, I noticed the bed looked oddly lumpy, as if someone had slept in it and then hastily arranged the linens and blankets without much attention. It initially seemed unimportant to me, but later that night I casually mentioned it to Jessica. "Hey, did anyone sleep in the guest bed?" "I was there recently and it appeared a bit untidy," I said. Jessica started to falter in her response and looked flushed and uncomfortable. "Well, I took a nap there earlier. Sorry, I was cleaning up and was so exhausted that I just jumped into bed without having the time to tidy up properly," she replied. At that point in her marriage, I deeply trusted Jessica and had no reason to doubt her explanation was anything but utterly sincere. Indeed, I thought it was amusing that she was embarrassed because she had taken a nap in the afternoon, and the messy blanket wasn't the only clue I overlooked. Over the next year or two, a sequence of odd and confusing incidents occurred which, had I been more aware, would have disclosed Jessica's deceit. For example, I believed her usually calm role as an assistant manager at a charming independent bookstore now involved her in lengthy essential meetings every Tuesday for 5 to 6 hours a period, during which I was advised not to contact her. Additionally, I ignored the causes of the small bruises appearing on her body, some located in very hidden areas. Was there unfamiliar underwear in the laundry? Moreover, there was the issue with the orange juice. Jessica began shopping at a new high-end grocery store, which was okay except it lacked several items we needed, including my preferred orange juice brand. I expressed my dissatisfaction and recommended changing stores, yet she insisted that the new store was superior and more conveniently located on her way back from her Tuesday commitments. Her shopping patterns might not appear directly related to infidelity, but this behavior eventually led me to suspect and uncover the truth, shattering my heart less than a year and a half from the first clue. Jessica indicated that Bruce and Mindy would require additional financial aid. Soon he hadn't repaid any of the initial $60,000, and I was reluctant to contribute further, especially to support what I considered an unsustainable venture. Thus I refused Jessica's plea, hoping she would get the message and cease her requests, but she persisted, cautioning Mindy and Bruce that without improving and increasing their purchases, their business might fail. Although I still sought to remain well-liked, I felt compelled to not outright refuse, so I eventually agreed to assess Bruce's business strategy and visit the store to evaluate his intentions. I hoped Jessica would give up if I demonstrated it was a bad investment. I met Bruce at his business on Monday morning. He gave me a tour, introduced me to the staff, and enthusiastically clapped me on the back, as if we were longtime friends. While pausing to converse with someone, he confidently discussed his business plan, bordering on unconvincing, and maintained that with a bit more capital for inventory and some renovations, the store would soon be profitable. Bruce and I spent half an hour in his office, where I delicately expressed my concerns. I noted the business had significant flaws and subtly suggested that, unless he could streamline operations and lower costs and prices, it would struggle to attract more customers and increase earnings. I even gently advised him to consider selling the business and pursuing other opportunities, yet he took offense and claimed that a makeover was all that was needed to fix the problems. I couldn't bear to deny his request for financial help, so I explained that my personal funds were insufficient for a substantial loan, and it would need to come from a trust. I mentioned I would discuss with Bernie to see if he could facilitate the loan, but made no promises. My strategy was to avoid confrontation and act as though I was genuinely trying to assist him in securing funds before delivering the bad news and blaming Bernie for the refusal. It was a cowardly approach, but I aimed to maintain family harmony and avoid serious financial setbacks. In reality, Bernie was usually prepared to assist as needed, but I consistently emphasized to everyone that he had strict control over the trust and I couldn't intervene in his decisions. It may seem unjust to portray Bernie as the antagonist, but honestly I believe he relished the part and never expressed any grievances about it to me. At the end of our talk, Bruce nodded and grinned confidently, as if he was sure he would receive the recognition he deserved. He shook my hand firmly and patted my back again, amplifying my guilt as I left. I exited the parking lot and drove down the highway, pondering my meeting with Bruce and mentally trying to absolve myself from the cowardice and near deceit involved in our dealings. While I was driving, my focus wasn't entirely on my surroundings until I noticed something that initially seemed like a simple coincidence, but gradually evolved into an odd, disconcerting idea. There was a smaller grocery store, unlike the typical large franchises, painted green with a prominent sign reading Salvador. This struck me as strange, because I didn't recall ever seeing a store like this, yet the name triggered a faint memory. I mulled over this for a few minutes until it dawned on me the store was called Salvador. Jessica had recently switched to shopping at a supermarket that didn't stock my favorite brand of orange juice but was closer to our home. However, this Salvador store was not near her office, our residence, or any reasonable location for her weekly shopping, making it an improbable choice for her Tuesday errands, unless she was there while at a furniture store. As I contemplated, unsettling scenarios began to emerge. I turned the car around, drove by Salvador's and returned to park at Bruce's furniture store lot. I pulled out my phone to verify if this was the only Salvador store in Chicago, then spent about 15 or 20 minutes thinking over all the possible reasons she might visit there. I pondered if Jessica had another office in the area, if she was meeting a friend like Mindy for lunch, or perhaps attending a nearby gym or similar establishment. Yet my thoughts inexorably led me to a conclusion I was hesitant to embrace. Driven by a sudden need to collect more information and confront Bruce directly, I left my car and quickly made my way to the furniture store's main entrance. The clock on the glass showed that the store usually stayed open late on weekdays, except for Tuesdays when it closed at noon. The seed of doubt that had planted itself earlier was now flourishing. After entering, I approached the first staff member. I encountered an uncomfortable middle-aged man making coffee. "I apologize, but I'm about to take a break," he stated curtly. I didn't want to impose, but I had pressing issues to discuss with Bruce McCloy concerning some major financial matters and required further details. I looked at him expectantly, yet he kept stirring his coffee, even taking a sip, disregarding my plea. The reason they couldn't endorse the product suddenly became clear, and I was momentarily dumbstruck. Before speaking again, this time more insistently, "This is crucial. Could you please summon him for me?" At first he appeared confused, but then understanding lit up his face. "You were here earlier with Bruce, correct?" "Oh yes, come on in. Bruce is in a meeting with a vendor, but you can wait for him in the break room if you'd like. I don't believe he'll be long, perhaps only about 30 minutes. He led me back to the room, offering me a cup of coffee and the TV remote. I quickly devised a strategy to confront Bruce directly and bluff about having concrete proof of his and Jessica's involvement in an affair. I announced that, unless he confessed immediately, the evidence would be disclosed to Mindy and the whole family. I resolved that if Bruce was guilty, he would be dismissed immediately. If not, I would have to bear the embarrassment and possibly dismiss it lightly. I believed I was pacing the room, mentally rehearsing my approach, thinking of ways to suggest that I had photographs or videos, or even hint that Jessica had admitted to it, as I braced for the impending confrontation. As I distractedly surveyed the room, I flipped through magazines and watched several TV shows before deciding to look for more clues. It quickly became evident that if they were exploiting the company for deceit, it likely took place in this lounge, and if it occurred here, they probably used the dilapidated sofa I had been observing for a moment or two. I inspected the sofa with irritation and trepidation. It was a washed-out green with numerous coffee stains and a tear in the material. One of the armrests clearly had seen better days. It definitely belonged more in a junkyard or a second-hand store. I lifted the cushion, and my heart rate slightly increased. I observed that it was a queen-sized mattress complete with coverings. I hastily confirmed that Bruce remained in his office before I extracted the mattress. The bedding was soiled and wrinkled, showing slight yellowing in spots that typically suggest moisture following sexual activity. There were a few smudges of lipstick on the mattress, and it emanated a potent fragrance of cologne. Upon unfolding the mattress, I spotted some debris beneath the sofa on the floor, so I stretched my right arm across the mattress to access the discolored carpet underneath, picking up each piece individually. Ultimately, I found a pen, 37 cents, a broken coffee cup, an exhausted tube of lubricant, and a bill from a restaurant. Jessica preferred eating at a Mexican restaurant, and the receipt displayed her unique, elegant, and incriminating handwriting. Reflecting upon it, I acknowledged that the receipt was indeed feeble circumstantial evidence which could be easily countered by various explanations or defenses, yet finding it provided me with some comfort. This revelation, combined with minor irritants from her Tuesday itinerary, bruises, the state of her undergarments, and the disarray in her bed, painted a clear image of an unfaithful wife and a deceitful brother-in-law. My plan to intimidate Bruce into confessing now appeared ill-conceived. I was in search of irrefutable evidence of cheating, and while confronting him might complicate matters or make it difficult to establish proof, knowing when and where the infidelity likely occurred, I was nearly certain I could amass the required evidence and proof. I refolded the mattress and sat on the sofa, gritting my teeth and sensing my heartbeat accelerate. I had been misled in several business transactions, and I recall once being swindled in a card game, but this level of personal betrayal was unprecedented in my life. I was prepared to yell, weep, shout, and pound the wall simultaneously, yet then a single dominant urge rose from this internal conflict, the desire for vengeance. I gradually settled myself and began to evaluate my situation, aiming to think as objectively and serenely as possible. I considered Bruce and my wife's vulnerabilities and how I might leverage them to soothe my wounded ego once I had tangible proof. Initially, I wanted to attack Bruce, but I merely viewed that as a pathway to imprisonment. My subsequent idea was to deny the loan and demand immediate repayment of all outstanding debts, but I remembered Bernie's advice when I was contemplating borrowing from a notably aggressive lender. He warned against it, adding that if you owe money to someone, especially someone indifferent to your well-being, they have leverage over you. I aimed to catch Bruce off guard. Peering back into Bruce's office, I saw him on his feet, exchanging pleasantries with a supplier. I gestured and grinned widely. He reciprocated the gesture, escorted the supplier out, and quickly returned to the break room. "Hey, John, did you forget something? Do you need more information?" I shook my head, still smiling. "Listen, Bruce, I've been reflecting on today, and I think I may have left the wrong impression. I hope you realize that I view you as an outstanding entrepreneur, and you have a tremendous opportunity to succeed with this store. However, as I was leaving, I realized I might have misunderstood when I inquired about your backup plans if things didn't go as planned." He smiled reassuringly. "No, John, I've got this. A savvy entrepreneur asks tough questions." "Excellent. I just wanted to confirm that I truly value what you're doing here. Plus, your family and I have to trust that this isn't just a risky venture, it's the smartest decision you could make as a friend, family member, and businessman. So, I didn't want you to go home without knowing that I was dedicated to securing this financing for you. I can't imagine us not managing to secure it. As I've said before, I don't have substantial funds in my accounts, so I need to apply for a trust fund withdrawal. But honestly, I'm confident I can convince Bernie, and we will obtain the funds for you." Bruce listened intently, his smile growing as I spoke. Man, that sounds fantastic. I'm telling you, this venture is set for success, hence this loan is as safe with me as with any bank. You shouldn't worry at all. I'm utterly calm. Bruce, Bernie will, naturally need to discuss some conditions since he's committed to safeguarding the trust with collateral and such. If you consent, I can finalize everything within a couple of days. I'm sure you will have the funding within a week. The following morning, I walked into Bernie's office, shut the door, and took a seat. Bernie was on a call, scribbling notes and gesturing with one finger that he would be with me shortly. My restlessness was apparent as he concluded his call, and noticing this, he looked at me quizzically and inquired, "So, John, what's making you so nervous today?" I cleared my throat and leaned in to explain. "Bernie, I need to utilize a trust to secure an important loan." "Sure, I see no problem with that. What sort of loan and for how much?" He activated his computer with a click and opened various icons, revealing a spreadsheet with the trust fund details. I cleared my throat again and moved closer. "Listen, Bernie, before we initiate the documents, the first thing I require from you is absolute secrecy. You're aware I always demand privacy. I need you to comprehend that this request is unusual and might be tempting to share with peers or family. I want this to remain strictly between us." He adjusted in his seat, his brow furrowed, and after a brief pause he began to respond. "John, if this is illegal, it's completely legal. Not illegal at all. At all. What I really need you to do is draft a document that exemplifies total legality." He gave a slight nod, so I proceeded. "I need to borrow funds and require you to draft the loan agreement. I expect the terms of the loan to be explicitly clear. I plan for the loan to be firmly secured by the business to which I am lending, and the consequences of non-payment to be rigorously defined. It appears you expect a default. It's almost as though you aim to trap the guy. So who are you trying to trap, and for what reason?" I paused briefly before meeting his gaze directly. "I aim to trap my brother-in-law, Bruce." "The motive is Jessica." His eyebrows shot up in surprise. He opened his mouth to speak several times but remained quiet. Eventually he took a sip of water from a glass on his desk and asked apprehensively, "Are you sure about this?" "Definitely," I affirmed. "Within a week." The document was prepared, and I personally brought it to Bruce for his evaluation and signature. He invited his lawyer, a compact yet sturdy banker named Tim, who was also his cousin, to join us and review the document. "Okay, sir," I started. "Tim, I reviewed it last evening and it mostly aligns with my expectations for a business loan, but Bruce, there are a couple of points I'd like to underscore before you sign." "Okay," Bruce responded with his usual polite smile. "All right, give me the details." Tim cleared his throat and looked earnestly at Bruce. I thought I noticed contempt in his gaze, as if he knew how little Bruce grasped about running a business. "All right, first off, the $425,000 loan will be repaid over 7 years. You have a fairly standard interest rate here. Repayments will start immediately, totaling just over $6,000 a month." Bruce nodded. "The actual amount you will receive is just $365,000 as we are consolidating it with your prior loan from a few years ago. John will take $60,000 and you will receive the remainder. Does that make sense?" "Understood," Bruce remarked cleverly with a slight Italian accent. Tim glanced at him again and said softly, "All right, now the loan is secured with collateral tied to both your business and the property over the kayak area. Is this the place they hunt ducks?" "Yes," Bruce signaled to Bernie while talking to Tim. "They plan to protect Jonk's trust should the business fail." He frowned briefly before quickly adding, "But that won't happen. The business is in top shape." "I believe so," and Bernie Black seemed to agree. He gave me a nod and a smile, and John certainly believed so indeed. "John, certainly," I answered with as much vigor as I could summon. Bruce presented the books to me, and it seems he's on the path to a profitable undertaking. I grinned, although I'm uncertain if you're acquainted with Bernie, who is exceedingly prudent and always envisions the direst outcomes. He aims to safeguard the trust, making it vital for him that should the business falter due to some unexpected cause, there's a fallback to reimburse the trust. Tim grimaced, then gazed at Bruce. "Do you comprehend that in case of default? You stand to forfeit not only the enterprise but also the ancestral duck hunting land." "Absolutely," Bruce responded with sincerity, likely to reassure Tim of his grasp and serious approach to the caution. "I'm aware of the hazards, yet I'm quite hopeful about the venture, and I'm convinced that obtaining this loan is far safer than trying to run it without the funds. Do you realize that fines start accruing 3 months after a missed installment?" "I completely understand," he smiled at me, as though we were in on a secret, as if confident I would never allow Bernie to enforce severe penalties, except for the gravest breaches. I merely returned a smile. At home, Jessica was overjoyed. She enthused about how Bruce's business was set to thrive now that he had sufficient capital to address his primary challenges. I somehow refrained from voicing my actual thoughts, which were that Bruce was the main problem, and no amount of funding would rectify that, but for the following fortnight, staying silent about Bruce's business acumen was the easiest course of action around Jessica. I required more proof to proceed with my plans to dissolve my marriage, and that would take time, hence I was compelled to control my emotions, which oscillated between sadness, anger, and disgust whenever I pondered her betrayal. Dining with her without exploding became a battle, and intimacy was dodged whenever feasible, and since I had no alternative, I relied on memories of a particularly distasteful sexual experience from my youth at 18. My buddies and I journeyed to San Diego for spring break. We spent a night in Tijuana to relax. We indulged in drinks, witnessed some highly explicit and truly disturbing sex shows, and emerged slightly altered. I found myself with a woman in her 30s who had evidently endured a hard life. She wasn't especially appealing, and perhaps even less so than I recalled, my perception of attractiveness undoubtedly skewed by substantial alcohol consumption. Even so, I was hesitant about taking her to bed, and began making excuses to depart, but my friends mocked me, challenging my manhood and sexual orientation, making it seem like I had no other option. I reluctantly forced a smile, drank several more shots, gritted my teeth, and followed her into the grimy, moist private room above the bar to commence our encounter. To get through it, I decided to disregard her presence, treating her merely as an instrument for sex. I perceived her as an object, using and deriving pleasure from her despite the noisy bar, cramped conditions, soiled linens, and the foul odors she exuded. Over the following 3 weeks, when intimate with Jessica, she transformed into that figure in my mind. I closed my eyes, pressed my dispassionate nose against her, and embraced her as I had the unfortunate woman from Mexico all those years ago, nothing tender or loving, purely a physical act. Once initiated, it became disturbingly simple to be as brisk and forceful as possible. I was quite aggressive, and unsurprisingly, Jessica sensed the shift. Eventually, she shared her sentiments, desiring gentler, more romantic moments in bed. Yet she seemed to accept our current approach and reflected on it. She noted that I was a jerk, an improvement over our past interactions. In another reality, I thought she might have done well with American tourists in Tijuana. Uncovering clear evidence of an affair was as easy as I had expected. Bruce allocated some of the funds to rejuvenate the business, and during the day, various workers were making improvements. I accurately foresaw that the electrician, who had $1,500 in his rear pocket, would set up a camera and a recording device in a ceiling light on a Monday morning, roughly a month after Bruce received the funds, positioned over the couch in the living room. Within 2 days, the setup was complete. I now possessed a detailed understanding of Bruce and Jessica's behavior, which prepared me for what I would observe through the webcam. I chose to monitor from my office at work, equipped with a drink and snacks, attempting to view everything as detachedly as possible, as though I were observing a film. It turns out that witnessing your spouse being affectionate with another person is significantly more distressing than just knowing about it much more. By the conclusion of the video, I had consumed so much scotch that driving home was impossible. I threw up twice at my desk and hurled a paperweight at my office door. The events progressed as one might anticipate. On Tuesday, I got in early, swiftly scanned, until I observed a woman in a blue dress walk into the room with a sizable shopping bag, extract new sheets, and spread them on the sofa. I immediately reduced the playback speed to normal and ascertained with a solemn face that the woman was Jessica. After swapping the sheets, she reopened the bag, retrieved a wine bottle and 2 glasses, removed her blue dress, folded it neatly, and stashed it in her bag before sitting on the bed's edge in thigh-highs, French-cut panties, and a highly revealing bra, reading a book. It was strangely bizarre, akin to an odd performance art event I once saw in New York, where a barely clothed young woman recited esoteric New Age poetry to an audience more fascinated by her physique than the poetry. Bruce eventually entered the room. Jessica set aside her book, smiled, and stood to hug him, then teasingly reprimanded him for making her wait. He humorously responded that her issue was her impatience for his arrival. They both chuckled at the familiar joke, kissed for a few minutes before Jessica reached for his belt and lowered his trousers and underwear to his ankles. The intimacy I saw was mundane. They serenely transitioned through each phase, each anticipating the next. The intimacy was unremarkable. He struggled to keep a constant pace, resembling a metronome, which I would have found tedious had I not been so disturbed. Around the 10-minute mark, Bruce reached his climax, and I believe Jessica did as well, judging by how she abruptly extended her legs and threw her head back. They remained in silence for a few minutes before he rolled onto his side, and they resumed kissing. By the time they concluded, I was deeply hurt and enraged. I realized the scenes I had seen were etched into my memory like a permanent stain that could never be removed, and therefore I could never forgive either of these two traitors. I was satisfied I had a plan to terminate rather than save my marriage. As I went to turn off the video, I noticed they had begun conversing in bed. Jessica lay on her side, her head supported, resting her right hand on her right elbow and tracing patterns on Bruce's chest. They exchanged glances, whispered softly, and smiled contentedly. Jessica softly complained about having to use the furniture business as a cover for their affair. Bruce rolled onto his side and replied, "Come on, Liv, if we use a hotel, we will definitely leave traces. We nearly got caught using one of our houses. We really have no choice." Jessica shrugged. "Yes, I understand, but I wish we had another place to meet. I don't like this room. Changing last week's dirty sheets to make love doesn't excite me." Bruce stretched out and caressed her face while grinning. "We could always elope." Jessica laughed in response, and Bruce's expression became thoughtful, his smile fading slightly. "Seriously, Liv, have you ever regretted marrying John? I mean, I love Mindy and she's a good wife, but I'm curious if you think it would be better if you and I were together instead of them." Jessica sat up on the bed, practically sitting with her back against the back of the sofa and her arms wrapped around her knees, which were pulled up to her chest. She looked at Bruce before answering. "Come on, Bruce. How many times must we discuss this? We've got something quite unique, but no, I don't think it would be better if we were married. Certainly we could be content together, but I also hold affection for John, and you have feelings for Mindy. Should we pair up, we'd end up isolated. John, known for his loyalty, would not engage in an affair with me were I to be wed, and it's unlikely that Mindy would approve. Either she moved closer and planted a kiss on Bruce's cheek, caressing his chest with her left hand. The reality, Bruce, is that individuals like us possess a unique gift: love. We are capable of loving multiple people simultaneously. We ought to love more than one person. It suits us. However, Mindy and John don't share this trait. Their restraint guarantees they cannot achieve what we can. They are incapable of controlling their emotions and pleasing everyone. Upon hearing her words, my rage erupted, and I hurled my papers out the office door. Because I loved her, she might be the only woman who ever loved me. I was oblivious to how conceited, misguided, and egocentric my wife was. In her perspective, she transformed her infidelity into a kind of personal virtue. For her, this wasn't an act that betrayed her life or marriage, but one that enhanced the love in the world, which she deemed not only her right but also her moral obligation. That night, I slept on the couch in my office and completed all the paperwork. When I got back the following evening, Jessica confronted me with her hands on her hips and an annoyed scowl. "Where in the world were you last night?" I was seriously concerned. "You didn't phone, you didn't text, you left me completely in the dark," I stopped her with. An upheld hand. "I was at the office last night. I drank excessively and couldn't make it home, so I stayed there." She looked at me in utter perplexity. "Hold on, why were you drinking at the office?" I grinned and nodded at her. She persisted. "You could at least keep me informed. I nearly contacted the police." "And why were you drinking at work?" She continued to gaze at me, completely perplexed. Silently, I walked past her into the living room, took a seat on the couch, placed my feet on the coffee table, and took my briefcase onto my lap, opening it. Jessica exhaled a frustrated sigh as she followed me into the living room and sat down in a chair opposite me. "Can we have some explanations, John? HM? Why the heavy drinking at work? What unfolded last night? What's going on?" I began sorting through my briefcase, pulling out several folders and arranging them on the couch next to me, seeming to organize them. I further examined the papers. I moved my legs off the table, replaced them with the documents, and leaned in. I rubbed my hands together, anticipating a delightful engagement. I looked at Jessica and said, "All right then, shall we start?" "What? Shall we talk about what happened last night?" "What about last night? What took place last night?" Jessica's aggressive demeanor soon softened. As I arrived home, I started to feel somewhat alarmed. "Can you tell me about last night?" "Yes, I saw the video. You watched the video." Yes, I viewed the footage of you and Bruce on the lounge couch, which upset me. Thus, I might have reacted strongly. Do you understand? I offered a restrained, hollow smile as Jessica's face shifted from astonishment to shock to fear. Her lips quivered slightly, spasmodically opening and closing without producing a single intelligible word. Her gaze shifted between the documents on the table to the door and then to me, as if she expected someone or something to enter, take away the papers and clarify everything. Finally she spoke. I am confused, John. What are you suggesting? Come on, Jessica, you can't possibly be that naive. I'm alluding to you and Bruce and what you did yesterday and every other Tuesday for the past year. I gestured toward the documents in front of me. I'm addressing the termination of our union. Jessica inhaled sharply and momentarily placed her hand over her mouth. I anticipated her response. John, we can resolve this. I believe I can make it clear to you. I understand, truly, she asserted. I extracted a DVD from my case, cradled it in my hands, then pushed it across the table towards her. Last night I gathered ample evidence to enhance my comprehension, indeed a veritable gold mine of fresh insights regarding my esteemed wife and generous brother-in-law. She eyed the DVD as though it were a lethal snake, drawing back slightly but refraining from touching it. Take it, Liv, this is your copy. I'll keep quiet about how I acquired it, but I'll retain my copy for later use to clarify your notions of love and dedication. She inclined forward, began to stand, and it appeared she might come towards me, but I stopped her with a raised hand. She resumed her seat, chewed on her lip for a moment, then gazed directly at me and spoke in a deliberately measured tone with feigned assurance likely aimed to disguise her shaky voice. John, please consider, you need to open your thoughts and reflect on this. It's futile to wreck your life or our lives over our differing principles and abilities. I love you, and I have always been ready to accept our discrepancies. I cut her off with a derisive snort. Differing principles and abilities. Really, do you view unfaithfulness as an ability? Truly, Liv, I believe anyone is capable of that. Honestly, ability is quite the wrong word. She inhaled deeply, glanced upwards, then re-established eye contact with me. Ability, I believe, is the correct term. I possess a superior capacity to enjoy, and I can and have truly cared for more than one person simultaneously. Beyond conventional norms of love and partnerships, there's no justification for why I can't or shouldn't use my talents. Please just halt. Your justifications only aggravate me further. I know you believe you have a distinct talent that permits you to deceive, lie, and betray when you should remain faithful, but that's merely Liv's rationale. Anyone can be romantically involved with several individuals at once. It doesn't endow them with remarkable romantic abilities, it merely categorizes them as unfaithful. Suddenly, be remorseful, seek reconciliation. Jessica had transformed, now irate, bold, and overly assured. Are you accusing me of infidelity? She challenged me. All right, perhaps that's true from your perspective, but still, I never lessened or concealed my love for you or Bruce, so I never betrayed my feelings or compromised my emotions due to an archaic regulation that insists I limit my affection to just one individual. Thus, although I may appear unfaithful to you, I am fully at ease with my reflection. I remained assured about my actions. She was breathing heavily and vehemently, her cheeks and chest flushed, her eyes gleaming with defiance, a look that confronted me, and I resigned myself. Would you favor living like this? Some sort of liberal relationship with multiple men, favoring one today and another tomorrow? Yes, by all means, but to claim that you weren't deceitful or unfaithful is ludicrous, because you never told me about your involvement with Bruce, and you knew I would disapprove. You sensed my fervor and shifted slightly to evade my gaze, yet I rotated to ensure our eyes met and continued. Thus you chose to mislead by omission, the gravest omission of truth I've ever witnessed. You convinced me and nearly everyone else that we were a devoted couple, yet you managed to either initiate or keep hiding Bruce's trivial affairs at the furniture store as best you could. You told falsehoods and perpetuated deceptions, ignoring the consequences. You possess a peculiar familial notion that brands you unfaithful. By now she had tears of anger coursing down her cheeks, her lips tightly sealed, more indignant than sorrowful, slowly shaking her head in rejection of my words, yet seemingly unable to express her thoughts. I kept my focus on her, awaiting a reply, but when none came, I ended the argument by pushing the papers closer to her. Read the document and consult a lawyer. This is advisable. Eventually, she expressed, what if I don't want a divorce? If so, you're out of luck in life because it will happen anyway. I hesitated for a second before remarking, with a barely hidden grin, yet that doesn't imply you'll be by yourself. That night I relocated to an apartment nearer to my office and quickly returned to my usual self. Jessica was working, an entrepreneur, and a loner who neither had the time nor the inclination to participate in social events. My working hours grew more demanding. Only one person remarked on this, but I recognized that staying home would only lead me to fixate on Jessica incessantly, replaying her distress in my thoughts, wondering if she was thinking about me or if she had grown close to Bruce. I had no alternative but to bury myself in my work and try to move on from my marriage as fast as I could. My inherent response to any challenge is to do whatever it takes to succeed, and I believe most people who know me professionally would anticipate lengthy, aggressive negotiations to clinch a deal, but that would have meant delays, encounters, and discomfort, and I was ready to pay to get out of the situation swiftly and without trouble. I proposed a substantial amount to Jessica in exchange for her continued support, with the threat of retracting the offer unless she agreed to a quick divorce. Deep inside, I hoped she would refuse, so that I could argue to keep the marriage alive, to reject the offer and struggle for the relationship I wanted, the only chance I had to endure. She thought her marriage should matter to her more than money, but it turned out that wasn't the case. After some semi-serious arguments, she accepted the terms and my marriage ended within 60 days. Bruce started to fall behind on payments a few months after the divorce was finalized, as one might anticipate. Bernie sent enough warnings in a stern letter informing him that we would begin to confiscate the funds by any means necessary. He called and emailed with excuses and promises, practically pleading for more time to settle his debts. I instructed Bernie to maintain a firm stance and made it clear that we would enforce our rights and pursue restitution as soon as legally permissible. On the night before the enforcement, Bruce begged to meet with me in person, which I granted. By then I knew he was desperate and prepared to do anything, including taking money from anyone to save himself from financial demise. I wanted the money to come from Jessica. I was keen for the meeting. We met in my office after hours. Most of the secretaries had gone home, but Sherry, my personal assistant, remained in the adjoining office, ready to provide documents as necessary. Bruce appeared more nervous than I had ever seen him, offering his sweat-drenched hand for me to shake. As he entered my office apprehensively, Jessica stood behind him, almost timidly, and seeing her made it difficult for me to breathe. Jessica positioned herself nearer to me than Bruce, dressed in one of my preferred outfits. She was fully done up, showcasing her glowing smile, and I had no doubt that she was there to strengthen Bruce's chances by capitalizing on my past emotional connections. But I immediately felt a compelling need to rush toward her, hold her, and kiss her, but recognizing the risk to my feelings, I forcibly repressed this impulse, adopted a serious expression, and gave a slightly awkward greeting to her presence. To be honest, I was taken aback that she appeared at all. I had been looking forward to this meeting and had carefully planned its details. I didn't expect Jessica to be there, and I was concerned that her presence might interfere with my strategy to link her to her partner's failings. I considered asking her to wait outside, but ultimately decided her presence could improve the outcome. Bruce began by attempting to convince me right after our handshake. He grinned widely and started discussing his desire to reconcile. He expressed his wish for my happiness and conveyed his appreciation for me, as well as his regret over how our relationship had deteriorated. I was surprised that he seemed keen to restore our friendship and considered the possibility that we could become friends once more. I doubted this without a smile. I glanced at him and abruptly cut off his monologue. "Bruce, please cease this foolishness. Your apologies mean nothing to me." He swayed in his seat as though struck, then clenched his lips, inhaled deeply through his nose, and acknowledged with a nod before resuming, "Okay, sorry, John, let's concentrate on the current issue." He regarded me as if I were to lead the meeting, yet I merely lifted my arms expectantly, awaiting his explanation. He nervously bit his lip and ran a shaky hand through his hair, before admitting he definitely planned to repay the debt but was currently short on cash. He mentioned Bernie's tough stance and his doubts about the pressure to settle his debts. He continued, explaining that the business was close to a breakthrough and that with a bit of patience he could remain solvent. Finally, he tried to reassure me that allowing him more time would benefit my financial situation. I reclined in my chair, keenly watching Bruce's tense smile and the slight sweat on his forehead as his right hand shook uncontrollably on the table between us. "Bruce, if you weren't so obviously a swindler, I might consider cutting you some slack." His eyes widened in astonishment and distress, and he leaned forward to object but stopped by my raised hand. Really, Bruce, you should understand it's nearly impossible to trust someone who hasn't hesitated to deceive his partner's daughter-in-law. You ought to know better. Asking her husband for financial support is completely ridiculous. Bruce squirmed in his seat while Jessica cleared her throat abruptly and said in a sad tone, "John, please, you can't fault Bruce just because I can do what I please," I interrupted Jessica sharply, giving her a firm glance. "What are you doing here? I hoped I might persuade you for the sake of old times. I still care for you," and I thought I stopped her curtly and bluntly. "You were wrong, frankly. Your presence only reminds me of Bruce's adeptness both metaphorically and practically. So do Bruce and yourself a favor by sitting back, trying to appear amiable, and limiting your comments." Her eyes filled with tears and her chin trembled, but she followed my directive and sat back quietly in her seat. I then addressed Bruce. "Okay, Bruce, here's the plan. You will settle the account swiftly according to a schedule. I will start the process to ensure maximum recovery from the collateral." Bruce shook his head firmly. "John, you can't strip me of my business. You just can't." "I can, and I will, if you don't pay. Bruce, my suggestion is to gather funds, approach your relatives, seek a bank, or sell something. I'm unbothered, just secure the money. However, as you're aware, banks are not an option for me. If it were viable, I would have sought it initially when help was scarce. They aren't that well off." I looked directly into Bruce's eyes. "Don't tell me your family lacks resources. I know they have them. No, truly, they would help if they could, but they just can't." I turned towards Jessica. "Did you ask her for money?" Bruce slumped again. "Existing isn't the same as truly living, doesn't?" I laughed. "Of course I did. I sent her a check for $150,000. She's quite affluent." Jessica gave me a wry smile, and Bruce asked, appearing unaware of the substantial payment. She looked uncomfortable, perhaps slightly ill. "Yes, I have it, but I need the money." I laughed again. "Halt, Liv. You convinced me to support Bruce initially, assuring me that lending him the funds was a safe bet. What's with the hesitation now? Don't you have faith in Bruce to revive his enterprise? Aren't you inclined to assist? Make the case for why he merits the investment. If it's a wise choice for me, why not for you?" I offered her a somber smirk. She took a hard gulp, cast a fleeting look at Bruce, then set her eyes firmly on me, inhaled deeply, straightened her posture, and with a hint of defiance. In her tone, she announced her commitment to temporarily cover the deficit. Bruce's face lit up at her, she mustered a faint smile, and they took their leave. Bruce walked with an air of assurance, while Jessica seemed downcast. Holding the door open for them, I left Bruce with a final instruction. "Just remember, Bruce, the method is immaterial. I require the funds." He snapped back at me. Jessica appeared worried. In the ensuing months, I buried myself in my work, maintaining a professional and curt demeanor with everyone. I deliberately avoided intimate conversations, passed up social engagements, and opted for work or solitude. I tried not to ponder my wife's disloyalty, yet reminders of her were ubiquitous. As expected, Bruce's monthly payment arrived on my desk, eliciting an unpleasant sense of satisfaction, as though I played a part in driving the architects of my misfortune to ruin. Mindy made contact, and the situation worsened. She sent numerous emails and even phoned. To my surprise, Bruce and Jessica had confessed to her, albeit with a softened version of their affair, and she was initially upset but eventually offered them forgiveness, much to my dismay and shock. She insinuated her suspicion of their romance and their agreement to maintain it. She even weakly tried to persuade me to take Jessica back. My replies were acerbic and resentful, and I am certain I left her in tears after our second conversation. I never heard from her again. Mindy's seeming reconciliation highlighted that the emotional burden on Bruce and Jessica was less severe than I had anticipated. I now feared the narrative would end with Bruce settling his debts, compensating Jessica, and them parting ways satisfied with both financial and emotional resolutions, while I remained pitied as the one who couldn't comprehend contemporary love. My concerns were unfounded. The furniture store was ravaged by a fire 9 months post our encounter. The intense 2-alarm fire threatened several adjacent structures and made the evening news. I missed the broadcast, but Bernie caught it and promptly called to discuss the implications. He expressed disappointment over my risky venture, convinced the trust had lost a significant sum. I calmed him by offering to cover the losses if necessary, pointing out the land's inherent value due to its prime location. This raised suspicions about the fire's origin, and when accelerants were detected, the insurance company refused to honor the claim. Without the store's income, Bruce defaulted on his obligation, and I ended up with a scorched site and 35 acres of prime Mississippi duck hunting territory. The criminal probe stretched over half a year. The police pieced together a strong circumstantial case against Bruce and Jessica. They demonstrated the store's lack of profitability and Jessica's escalating expenditures to keep it afloat. Bruce's frantic attempts to find alternative financing all fell through before he resorted to secretly putting the business up for sale. However, no purchasers came forward, even with the price drastically lowered. The investigation yielded no proof that either Jessica or Bruce was present at the store on the night of the blaze, nor that they had procured any materials to start or fuel the fire. Nonetheless, the hypothesis was that they had contracted an expert to set the fire. Investigators found numerous arson queries on Jessica's personal computer, call logs with connections to at least 2 known arsonists, and evidence of her withdrawing $115,000 in cash the week preceding the fire. Jessica and Bruce had a skilled lawyer, likely paid from the cash she withdrew, and the prosecutor was prepared for a formidable challenge, commencing with indictments for first-degree arson and fraud. The defense was firm on a plea to a lesser charge of fourth-degree arson, prompting discussions to schedule a court date. On the day set for trial, I found myself in the courthouse lobby, perched on a rigid bench, perusing a newspaper and rhythmically tapping my foot, when an announcement came that the trial would not proceed due to a settlement, and we were dismissed. As I collected my things, Jessica and Bruce entered, flanked by officers and their lawyer. A swarm of reporters advanced, microphones in hand, but they refused to comment. The media then turned to their lawyer. After a brief exchange with Mindy, Bruce exited the foyer with the officers, while Jessica approached me. I had to acknowledge her guts for facing me then. "So John, is fortune smiling on you today? Is this the outcome you were hoping for? Will I suffer for my wrongdoings?" I replied with a wry laugh and a nonchalant head shake. "I yearn for a loyal partner and a strong union. Without that, you have nothing I desire. I just want my investment returned," I stated. She retorted, "So, you're out of luck, aren't you? I've recovered some and now own a store," she said with a hint of mockery. "And what's your plan now? Has the fire ceased? You might be astonished at what a savvy entrepreneur can do with a prime piece of real estate, even one that's still smoldering." Her nostrils flared and her face tensed slightly. Taking a deep breath, she added, "And now you're satisfied, solitary, disconnected from anyone tied to your profession for the foreseeable future," with a sly grin. "Don't play ignorant. I know your aversion to new acquaintances." I engaged as if you meant the world to me, "But you're not the only woman out there," I proclaimed, to which she confidently smiled. "True, I'm not alone, but I doubt you'll locate what you tycoons call an adequate substitute. Like it or not, you will miss me." I leaned in and whispered, "I may be a bit solitary, but not you. The silver lining is you'll be in close quarters with a bevy of charming, gender-neutral women to lavish your copious love upon. It'll benefit you and the lesbian community alike." Jessica, taken aback by my comment, recoiled as if I were toxic. Her face contorted with contempt, her eyes ablaze with anger. She inhaled sharply, her chest heaving, and then exploded, "You're arrogant, narcissistic, and emotionally stunted," she shouted as the police led her away. I'm advancing towards the exit. I'll be in the same hallway as her, in solitude, virtually her prisoner as she hurls her verbal onslaught at me. Her once-present love for me has vanished, replaced by pure, scornful hatred. A wave of melancholy unexpectedly washes over me. I stifle the impulse to reveal my inner grief, offering a faint smile and cracking a few quips about her public display of foul language, yet she persists in her outburst as though my words fell on deaf ears. However, it will only be a matter of time before I'm released from this figurative prison to resume my life, while you will remain solitary, yearning for my company, and then years down the line when you're settled with a plain ex-secretary, you'll lament not having conceded. Her voice is abruptly silenced as the door slams behind her. I exit the courtroom, my day now free from the weight of judgment, and with no appointments or meetings ahead, I'm wrestling with an intensifying sense of gloom and isolation. I visit the site of origin and contemplate my existence. The temperature has fallen, and the persistent wind lashes at my coat and nips at my face as I survey the scene, still unsure of my next move with the ruins. The thought crosses my mind to just sell it all, to let go of the loss, and to revert to my previous life it was secure, perhaps even prudent. But then I realized there's an alternate path. I could take a gamble and start anew, maybe launching another furniture store. I ponder the prospects of succeeding in selling furniture from the exact location where Bruce met his downfall. I'm considering making a big deal out of it with aggressive marketing, billboards, and perhaps even television spots, something Bruce and my former spouse couldn't overlook. I could even name it Jessica and run endless clearance events. The choices I'm weighing regarding the property seem to mirror the decisions I've made about my life in general. Jessica was accurate in her assessment. My default social approach before her had been to retreat, to avoid the risks of closeness, and to immerse myself in my work. I see myself gradually moving towards a life of solitude, a life that's financially secure but predominantly joyless. I find myself reverting to something safe, akin to sitting on a concrete slab. I surveyed the scene once more, still pondering my next steps and mapping out my future. I found myself at a crossroads between my apprehensions and aspirations, the deep-seated habits that defined and comforted me, and my ambition to evolve and become something new. I was on the verge of leaving, heading back to my work routine, allowing the status quo to persist and deferring the decision to a later date, when suddenly beams of the late afternoon sun pierced the cloud cover between the buildings and cast a spotlight on the graffiti-scrawled wall across the way. The light set the wall ablaze with a fiery orange hue, making the concrete and the inscribed letters stand out with vivid clarity. The message was painted in bold, white letters that stood out, demanding attention, take action. I've always held a disdain for those who are superstitious for the way they allow seemingly trivial, objectively inconsequential occurrences to dictate their lives as omens or rituals, but as I lay on that concrete slab in November, recalling these words felt like destiny, a divine sign. I whipped out my cell phone and dialed the office. "Hello, Sherry, can you remind me of the name of the architectural firm that drew up plans for that new mall everyone's talking about? The one with the glass features and fountains? Hammerstone or something of the sort?" I could hear a faint amusement in her voice as she searched. "Yes, that's Hammerstone. They're out of Chicago." "All right, can you set up a meeting with them for me as soon as possible? Are we constructing anything?" I took in the surrounding area, envisioning the potential new store, and a wave of determination washed over me. "Yes, I believe so. I'm fine. Sure thing, boss. Need anything else?" My attention returned to the graffiti, my lips pressing together momentarily as I considered the command to act. "Yes, Sherry. Just one more thing. Do you recall the sales rep with the knockoff jeans, Brenda White?" The tall blonde, right? There was a hint of skepticism in Sherry's voice, perhaps pondering if I was in the midst of a crisis. "Can you pass along her contact details to me?" "Sure, boss. Do you want me to patch you through?" "No, I'll make the call myself. Thanks. What do you think about our story today?" I find the novel incredibly captivating, with a compelling setup and an unforeseen twist at the end. What's your take? Share your views in the comments and I'll see you in the next video.